The visit
This
that
is
was meant to be
wonderful.
ordinary.
It is.
The
I'm so
rain had
glad.
stopped just minutes
They're all
before
so
the royal
happy.
motorcade turned onto the narrow street
This is
outside
lovely, isn't
Northbridge
it?
Community
It
Medical
really is.
Center.
Everyone's so happy.
The clouds still hung low
Absolutely.
over the city, turning the late morning light into a soft gray glow that reflected off wet pavement and glass windows. Inside the car, William reviewed briefing notes on his tablet while Catherine watched the crowds gathering behind safety barriers. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders. Nurses and scrubs stood near the entrance, whispering excitedly. For most of them, this visit meant recognition, proof their work mattered. But to William and Catherine, these visits were never about ceremony. They were about people. Busy morning, William said quietly. Catherine nodded. Let's make sure we give them real time. Security officers exchanged small glances. They had learned that when Catherine said real time, schedules often stretched. Inside the hospital, preparation had been intense. Floors polished. Walls freshly painted. Staff briefed. Cameras positioned. But behind all the preparation lived real stories. On the pediatric floor, 9-year-old Sofia Alvarez lay under a pale blue blanket, tracing shapes on the fabric with her finger. She had been fighting a long illness that had taken most of her strength, and nearly all of her childhood routine. Her world had shrunk to hospital rooms, 4 machines, quiet nights, and her mother's whispered prayers. Sofia wasn't scheduled to meet the royal couple. She was considered too fragile for media interaction. But Sofia had only one wish that week: to see a real princess. Across the ward, Nurse Hannah debated with the pediatric supervisor. She's stable today, Hannah insisted. And emotionally this could help her. The supervisor hesitated. What if she gets overwhelmed? Hannah answered softly. What if she feels seen? After a long pause, permission was granted. Downstairs, William and Catherine entered the hospital to applause, but immediately shifted attention to staff and families instead of cameras. They asked about staff shortages, mental health resources, family housing challenges, long-term patient education. This wasn't performance. It was listening. Doctors quickly realized this visit felt different, less scripted, more human. When they finally reached Sofia's room, they expected another polite introduction. Instead, they found a small girl wearing a plastic toy crown and holding a worn stuffed rabbit. Her eyes widened. Not from fear. From wonder. Catherine didn't stand above her. She knelt beside her bed. Protocol quietly bent. Hello, Catherine said gently. Sofia whispered. You look like hope. The room went silent. That moment was not scheduled. Not rehearsed. Not planned. But something invisible shifted. Even security staff felt it. Even doctors felt it. Even William, standing quietly beside Catherine, felt something deeper than ceremony. A connection. A reminder. That leadership isn't distance. It's presence. And in that small hospital room, something began that no one could predict. Not the staff. Not the media. Not even William and Catherine themselves. But the world was about to notice. The room felt smaller somehow, not because of space but because of emotion pressing gently against every wall. Sofia's breathing slowed as she relaxed into the pillows, her small fingers still loosely wrapped around Catherine's hand. The steady beeping of the monitoring machines created a quiet rhythm, like a background reminder that every second mattered. William pulled a chair closer to Sofia's parents. Not across the room. Not standing above them. Beside them. Carlos cleared his throat, unsure what to say to the future king. Years of watching royal ceremonies on television had taught him there were rules to these moments. But William spoke first. How long have you been here? The question wasn't royal. It was human. Carlos hesitated, then answered quietly. Almost 9 months, with short breaks. William nodded slowly, absorbing not just the words but the weight behind them. That's a long road. Maria pressed a tissue to her eyes. Yes, she whispered. But she keeps us strong. Across the room, Catherine was listening to Sofia describe her favorite cartoon characters, nodding with full attention, never once glancing at a watch or doorway. Security officers shifted slightly outside. Schedules were collapsing. But no one interrupted. Because something sacred was happening, the kind of moment that reminds people why titles exist in the first place. To serve. Not to hurry past. Sofia suddenly looked serious. Do you ever get scared? She asked Catherine. The question caught everyone off guard. Catherine didn't rush to answer. She thought carefully, respecting the honesty of the question. Yes, she said finally. Everyone does sometimes. Sofia studied her face carefully as if searching for truth. What do you do then? Catherine smiled gently. I remember I'm not alone. Sophia nodded slowly like someone storing that idea somewhere safe. William noticed the stuffed rabbit again. One ear was sewn back on with mismatched thread. Who fixed that? He asked. My mom, Sophia said proudly. At night, when she thought I was asleep. Maria looked down embarrassed. William smiled warmly. That's real love. Carlos squeezed his wife's hand. The hospital hallway outside was filling with quiet whispers. Doctors, nurses, even administrative staff had gathered, sensing something meaningful was unfolding. Not spectacle. Not publicity. Something real. Inside the room, Sophia shifted slightly and winced. Catherine immediately noticed. Are you tired? A little, Sophia admitted. But I don't want you to leave yet. The words broke something open in the room. Catherine glanced at William. He nodded almost invisibly. They stayed seated. No rush. No signals to security. Just presence. For the next 20 minutes, nothing dramatic happened. And that was exactly what made it powerful. They talked about Sophia's favorite music. The beach she wanted to visit someday. Her dream of helping other children feel brave. Her favorite colors, purple and gold. Her grandmother's stories from childhood. Normal conversation. Normal human connection. The kind illness often steals. Then Sophia said something none of them expected. If I get better, I want to make hospitals feel less scary. Catherine's voice softened. That would help so many children. Sophia nodded. Maybe I could draw pictures for every room. William smiled. I think that's a brilliant idea. Nurse Hannah stood quietly near the doorway, tears forming in her eyes. She had seen thousands of patient interactions. But this felt different. Because Sophia wasn't being treated like a patient. She was being treated like a person whose ideas mattered. As time passed, Sophia's energy finally started fading. Her eyelids grew heavier. Catherine gently brushed a loose strand of hair from Sophia's forehead. You can rest, she whispered. Sophia shook her head weakly. Promise you'll help kids feel less alone. Catherine squeezed her hand softly. I promise we will try. That's when Catherine removed the bracelet. Simple silver. Small. Unassuming. She placed it carefully beside Sophia's rabbit. For strength, she said. Sophia stared at it like it was treasure. I'll keep it safe, she whispered. When William and Catherine finally stood to leave, the room felt different. Lighter. Stronger. Fuller. Carlos stood quickly. I don't know how to thank you. William shook his head gently. You already did. You're fighting for your daughter every day. Maria stepped forward and hugged Catherine briefly, then immediately pulled back, worried she had broken protocol. Catherine smiled warmly. It's okay. Outside the room, the hospital corridor had fallen silent. Staff lined the walls. Not clapping. Not cheering. Just watching with quiet respect. Because they knew. They had just witnessed something rare. Power choosing kindness over schedule. Status choosing presence over distance. But the moment wasn't finished yet. As William and Catherine reached the elevator, Catherine paused. She turned to the hospital director. What programs do you have for children without family visitors? The director blinked, surprised. Very few, resources are limited. Catherine nodded slowly. Let's change that. No announcement. No press statement. Just a quiet decision. But sometimes, quiet decisions echo the loudest. That afternoon, somewhere in the hospital, a nurse sat longer with a patient. A doctor explained treatment more gently. A volunteer signed up for extra hours. Not because they were told to. Because they were reminded. Why this work matters. And in her room, half asleep, Sophia held her rabbit close. The bracelet glinted softly in the hospital light. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a patient. She felt like someone important. Someone seen. Someone remembered. And outside the hospital, the world had no idea yet that a simple moment of kindness was about to travel farther than anyone imagined. When one moment reached the world, the video was never supposed to leave the hospital walls. It wasn't filmed professionally. There were no studio lights. No dramatic music. Just a short hallway clip recorded quietly on a nurse's phone, meant only for the hospital's internal morale group chat. It showed Catherine sitting beside Sophia's bed, William talking softly to her parents, and the moment the bracelet was placed beside the stuffed rabbit. 37 seconds. That was all. At first, it spread inside the hospital network. Then to local staff groups. Then one nurse shared it with a friend who worked at another children's hospital. By evening, it was on social media. By midnight, was everywhere. But what surprised everyone wasn't just that it spread. It was how people reacted. There were no political arguments, no controversy, no debates, just emotion. Pure human emotion. Comments flooded in from around the world. I'm a pediatric nurse in Brazil. I'm crying in the break room. My son is in treatment right now. This gave me strength today. I wish more leaders understood moments like this matter. I don't care about titles. I care about humanity. This is humanity. Within 48 hours, news networks picked up the story. But not as gossip. Not as celebrity coverage. As a story about compassion. Medical experts spoke about emotional support improving recovery outcomes. Child psychologists explained how feeling valued reduces fear in young patients. Healthcare workers shared their own stories of small moments that changed lives. Meanwhile, inside Northbridge Medical Center, something unexpected happened. Staff morale changed. Not dramatically overnight, but noticeably. More nurses volunteered for night shifts. Doctors spent an extra few minutes explaining procedures. Volunteers stayed longer with patients who had no visitors. Because that video didn't just show kindness. It reminded people of why they chose healthcare in the first place. 3 days later, the hospital director received an email. Then another. Then hundreds. From people asking, how can I help children who feel alone in hospitals? Some offered donations. Others offered time. Some simply offered letters for patients. Within 2 weeks, the hospital launched a pilot program. Stay a while. Companion support for young patients. Volunteers trained to sit with children during long nights. Read stories. Talk about normal life. Provide calm presence during scary moments. The idea was simple. Presence can be medicine too. But the ripple didn't stop there. Hospitals in other cities contacted Northbridge. Then hospitals in other countries. Soon, healthcare networks began sharing best practices for emotional companionship care. No law required it. No policy forced it. It grew because people wanted it. Back in her hospital room, Sophia didn't know about any of this yet. She only knew 2 things had changed. Her doctors smiled more. And nurses seemed less rushed when they talked to her. One afternoon, Nurse Hannah sat beside her and said, "You started something big, you know?" Sophia frowned slightly. "I did." Hannah nodded. "By reminding people how important it is to sit with someone." Sophia thought about that. Then smiled softly. "That's easy." Across the country, teachers began showing the video in classrooms. Not as royal news. As a lesson about empathy. Children wrote letters to hospitals. Some schools organized toy drives. Others started kindness hour programs encouraging students to support classmates who felt lonely. Meanwhile, Catherine and William continued their work quietly. They never mentioned the video publicly. Never claimed credit. Never turned it into a campaign slogan. Because to them, it wasn't strategy. It was instinct. But behind the scenes, something shifted inside royal charity planning teams. New discussions began. How can emotional support programs expand? How can families get better long-term assistance? How can hospitals help children feel less invisible? Not as public announcements. As real working meetings. One evening, weeks later, William asked Catherine during a quiet moment at home. "Did you know that moment would spread like this?" Catherine shook her head. "I just knew she needed someone to stay." William nodded. "Sometimes that's enough to change everything." Meanwhile, the original video passed 50 million views globally. But what mattered wasn't numbers. It was what people did after watching. More volunteers signed up for hospitals. More donations went to pediatric support programs. More conversations started about emotional care in medicine. Months later, global health conferences mentioned companion presence models, inspired by real-world patient stories. Doctors began presenting research on emotional stability improving treatment cooperation. Psychologists published studies on connection reducing patient anxiety. All from one moment. One room. One small girl. One simple bracelet. Back at Northbridge, Sophia slowly grew stronger. Not overnight. Not magically. But steadily. Hope changed how she fought. And hope is powerful medicine. One day she began drawing again. But this time her pictures were different. Hospitals filled with light. Doctors holding hands with children. Waiting rooms with bright colors and books. Rooms where no child sat alone. When Nurse Hannah asked why she changed her drawings, Sophia answered simply, "Because hospitals should feel like people care." Outside those hospital walls, the world kept moving. News cycles changed. New headlines replaced old ones. But the ripple remained. Quiet. Steady. Growing. Because sometimes, the biggest global impact doesn't start with speeches. It starts with one decision. To sit beside someone who needs you. To listen without rushing. To remind someone they matter. And somewhere inside Northbridge Medical Center, a bracelet still rested beside a stuffed rabbit. Not as a royal symbol, but as proof. Kindness travels. Farther than power. Farther than titles. Farther than anyone ever expects. The ripple became a movement. Spring arrived quietly that year. Outside Northbridge Community Medical Center, trees that had stood bare through winter slowly filled with green leaves again. Families waiting near the entrance sat under sunlight instead of gray clouds. Children in recovery units were sometimes wheeled outside just to feel fresh air. Inside the hospital, though, something even more meaningful was growing. The Stay a While companion program had officially expanded beyond the pilot phase. At first, administrators expected maybe 20 volunteers. They received over 600 applications in the first month. Retired teachers, university students, former patients, parents who had once sat beside hospital beds themselves, people who simply didn't want children to feel alone. Training sessions filled conference rooms. Volunteers learned how to talk to scared children, how to listen without overwhelming them, how to stay calm during difficult medical moments, how to be present without replacing family bonds. The program wasn't about replacing doctors, or nurses, or parents. It was about filling the silent spaces between, the spaces where fear usually lived. Nurse Hannah watched the first full volunteer shift with tears in her eyes. A teenage volunteer read storybooks to a boy waiting for surgery. An elderly woman crocheted quietly beside a child receiving treatment. A university student helped a patient record voice messages for her classmates. Small things. But small things change big feelings. 3 months after the royal visit, something unexpected happened. Other hospitals began reporting emotional improvements among young patients using companion support programs. Children slept better. Cooperation during treatments improved. Family stress levels lowered. Medical teams noticed tension in wards decreasing. Doctors started calling it something unofficial. The presence effect. Across the country, healthcare organizations began studying emotional care models. Not because they were told to. Because they saw results. Because they felt results. Because healthcare isn't only about medicine. It's about humanity. Meanwhile, Sophia continued growing stronger. Slowly. Step by step. She started attending hospital school sessions again. She laughed more. She drew constantly. But now her drawings had themes. Hope. Connection. Togetherness. One drawing caught everyone's attention. It showed a hospital hallway. But instead of empty chairs, every chair had someone sitting in it beside a child. At the top she wrote, "Nobody waits alone." The hospital framed it. Then printed copies. Then shared it with partner hospitals. Soon, it appeared in pediatric wards across multiple cities. Not as decoration. As a promise. Meanwhile, news about the companion program spread globally. Hospitals in Canada, Australia, Spain, and parts of Asia began pilot versions. Not identical, but inspired, adapted, localized. Because kindness doesn't need translation. One international pediatric conference even featured a panel titled, "Human Presence as Emotional Medicine." Doctors discussed research. Nurses shared patient stories. Psychologists explained the long-term effects of emotional support during childhood illness. And quietly, without branding, the story of one hospital moment became part of training presentations. Back at Northbridge, the hospital cafeteria changed too. Families began talking to each other more. Sharing advice. Sharing strength. A support circle formed organically every Wednesday evening. No official sign-up. Just chairs pulled into a circle. People who understood each other. One evening, Sophia and her mother attended. Sophia listened quietly as another child's father spoke about fear. Then Sophia said softly, "It's okay to be scared. But it's easier when someone sits with you." The room fell silent. Then several parents nodded. At the Royal Foundation offices, program advisors began reviewing reports. Data showed emotional support programs reduced anxiety levels significantly in pediatric patients. Requests for partnership funding increased. But William and Catherine remained consistent. No personal spotlight. Only support for systems that help children long-term. One afternoon during a planning meeting, an advisor asked, "Should we brand this initiative publicly?" William shook his head gently. "It's not ours." Catherine added softly, It belongs to every person who chooses to stay beside someone. Meanwhile, Sophia reached a milestone. She was allowed to go home part-time. The first night back, she sat on her own bed holding her stuffed rabbit. The bracelet still rested beside it. Not as something royal, as something personal. A reminder. Someone powerful once slowed down long enough to listen to her. And because of that, thousands of people slowed down for others. Back at the hospital, a new volunteer orientation video played. It didn't show speeches. It didn't show royal titles. It showed volunteers sitting quietly beside children, reading, drawing, holding hands, listening. At the end of the video, one sentence appeared. Presence is powerful. Months later, healthcare journals began publishing long-term studies. Findings showed emotional support reduced procedure anxiety. Companion presence improved treatment cooperation. Family emotional resilience increased. Staff burnout slightly decreased. Not miracle cures, but meaningful change. Real change. And it all traced back to one simple truth. When people feel seen, they fight harder. They hope longer. They heal stronger. One afternoon, Sophia visited the hospital again for routine checkups. She walked slowly through the pediatric ward hallway and stopped, because every chair outside treatment rooms now had someone sitting in it beside a child. She smiled quietly. Her drawing had become real life. Nurse Hannah knelt beside her. You see what you helped start? Sophia shook her head. I didn't start it. Hannah smiled. You reminded people. Outside, spring sunlight filled the hospital windows. Inside, laughter echoed down hallways that once felt too quiet. Volunteers signed in daily. Families felt less alone. Children felt braver. And somewhere, in offices and meeting rooms and hospital wards around the world, people kept choosing presence. Over rushing. Over distance. Over silence. Because sometimes, the biggest movements don't begin with plans. They begin with a moment where someone chooses. I will stay. And the world, slowly, learns to stay too. The legacy that outlived the moment. Summer arrived brighter than anyone expected. Outside Northbridge Community Medical Center, the trees were now full and green, their branches offering shade to families waiting outside. Children who had once only seen the sky through hospital windows now walked carefully across the courtyard, holding hands with parents or volunteers. Inside, the hospital no longer felt like a place people simply endured. It felt warmer. Not because of renovations. Not because of new equipment. Because of people. Because of presence. Because somewhere along the way the idea had taken root. No child should face fear alone. Nearly a year had passed since that quiet hospital room moment. There had been no major announcement. No official global campaign. No dramatic speeches. But the impact had spread quietly through healthcare systems, communities, and families across continents. The stay-a-while companion model was now active in dozens of hospitals worldwide. Each one slightly different. Each one shaped by local culture. But all built on one simple belief. Being there matters. At Northbridge, the companion program now ran 24 hours a day. Volunteers rotated through night shifts, the hardest hours when fear feels loudest and hospitals feel loneliest. Nurses noticed something remarkable. Children who once panicked during nighttime treatments now stayed calmer. Some asked volunteers to read stories. Others simply wanted someone to sit nearby while they slept. No grand gestures. Just quiet comfort. One evening, a new volunteer named Daniel sat beside a little boy waiting for a late-night scan. The boy whispered, "Will you stay until they come get me?" Daniel nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." The boy closed his eyes and fell asleep. For hospital staff watching nearby, it was another small miracle. Across the world, similar moments happened daily. In Toronto, in Barcelona, in Sydney, in small regional hospitals that never expected global attention. The ripple had become routine kindness, which is the strongest kind of change. Meanwhile, Sophia's life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Not identical to before, but full. She attended school part-time. She joined art club. She still visited the hospital regularly for checkups, but the fear that once followed her like a shadow had faded. In its place was purpose. Her art teacher noticed something unique about her drawings. They always showed people together. Hands connected. Rooms filled with light. No empty chairs. One afternoon, her school held a community exhibition. Sophia submitted a painting titled, "Stay." It showed a hospital room, a child in bed, and a chair beside them with someone sitting in it, faceless, universal. Anyone. Everyone. The painting quietly went viral online after a local journalist shared it. Not as a royal story. Not as a medical story. As a human story. When reporters later asked Sophia what inspired the painting, she answered simply, "Someone stayed when I was scared. So now people stay for other kids." Back at Royal Foundation offices, reports continued arriving. Companion care programs showed measurable emotional improvement in pediatric patients. Volunteerism rates increased in healthcare support roles. Medical staff burnout slightly decreased in hospitals with emotional support volunteers. Not perfect solutions, but meaningful ones. During a quiet review meeting, one advisor said, "It's remarkable how one unscripted moment influenced so many systems." William responded quietly, "People were ready to be reminded." Catherine nodded. Kindness spreads fastest when it feels real. They never treated the moment like an achievement. To them, it was simply the right thing to do at the time. But history often grows from simple choices made quietly. Back at Northbridge, the hospital added a permanent plaque near the pediatric ward entrance. Not naming any royal visit. Not referencing any event. Just words. "Here, no child faces fear alone." Families touched the plaque as they passed. Staff walked by it every shift. Volunteers saw it on their first day. It wasn't about who inspired it. It was about what it reminded people to do. Years later, medical students studied emotional support models as part of pediatric care training. Healthcare conferences referenced companion presence frameworks. Volunteer programs became standard in many children's hospitals. None of it traced neatly to one moment. But the roots were there. Quiet. Steady. Growing. On a bright afternoon, Sophia returned to Northbridge for what doctors called a milestone visit. Not celebration, but progress. She walked slowly through the pediatric hallway. And smiled. Because every treatment room chair was filled. Parents. Volunteers. Friends. Nobody waiting alone. Nurse Hannah hugged her gently. "You see what happened?" Sophia smiled. People remembered to stay. That night, Sophia placed the bracelet beside her stuffed rabbit again. Not as something precious. As something meaningful. A promise kept. Outside her window, the world moved fast as always. News cycles changed. New stories replaced old ones. But in quiet hospital rooms around the world, someone still sat beside someone else. Because of a reminder. Because of a choice. Because of a moment where presence mattered more than schedule. And that became the real legacy. Not headlines. Not views. Not recognition. But thousands of unseen moments where someone chose to stay. Because history doesn't always change through power. Sometimes, it changes through patience. Through listening. Through sitting beside someone when they need you most. And somewhere, in hospitals across the world tonight, a child will fall asleep feeling less afraid. Because someone is sitting nearby. Choosing not to leave. Final moral message. Real impact doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a chair pulled closer. A hand held quietly. A moment given freely. Because simple gestures, when they are real, can travel farther than any crown ever could.